Hi, my name's Hilary Stupa and I'm a developer with QDabra Software. Today I'd like to show you how to work with QRules in your form and submit data to multiple SharePoint lists. We're also going to update list items from our form. Here's the form I'm going to be working with today. Now this form already has some basic logic in it. We have a customers field, and this customers field has data provided to it by a SharePoint customers list. There's an order field. The order field has data provided to this drop-down from an orders list in SharePoint. I'm using a Northwind SharePoint template, so some of these customers and orders might look familiar to you if you've worked with Northwind over the years using Microsoft products. What I'm going to do with this form is I'm going to modify it using QRules so that we can actually edit items that we've selected or add new items to our SharePoint list. So let's preview it and I'll show you what's currently in place. Now currently my form just has two little drop downs on it. This first one selects a customer. When I select a customer, my orders list is queried. I'm using SharePoint 2010, so I have query fields and I'm just running a query to get back only the orders I need. So all of these orders are going to apply just to this particular customer. If I have a customer selected and I click my edit button, then these are some main data source fields that I'm populating with customer information so that I'll be able to eventually modify them and save those changes back to SharePoint. And if I change the customer to blank and then click my edit button, you can see I've got blank fields that I could possibly fill out. And my intention is to, when I fill out a blank customer and click save, to save that new customer or to be able to edit an existing customer from these fields. And I'm just copying the data directly into those fields when I click this button. I also have this order field, same kind of logic. When we select an order here, if I click the button and an order is selected, it copies in the information from that particular order. As you can see, this is related to this particular customer. Some of my fields here are drop downs so that I can change those to make editing a little bit easier. I think probably I wouldn't want to change the customer, but it gives you the general idea. And if this were a blank order instead, and I clicked my edit button, I would just have blank fields to fill out. Now, right now my save buttons, they don't do much. They just set the fields in their respective sections to clear and set the field that I'm using for my conditional formatting to show and hide this section back to blank so that my section will hide appropriately. So I have no complex logic in this form right now at all. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and close my template and inject it with QRules so that we can start adding some more intricate logic. I've opened up the QRules injector. I've navigated to my form file and I'll click the inject button. Again, you want to make sure your form file is closed when you inject QRules because QRules is adding some things to your form template. To do that, it needs to be able to unpack your form as source files and pack it back up with the new data connection, the code DLL, and so forth. We get a little message about being sure we back up. It's something you might want to pay attention to. You may decide that you don't want to use QRules in your form. So before you inject, if you save a copy, that makes it easy for you. It is possible to manually remove QRules, however, if necessary. So we injected successfully. I'm going to go ahead and close these things up, and then I'll open my template up again in design mode. So back in our template, we can see that we now have a QDabra rules data connection and that QRules has been injected into our form. So let's talk about what I'm doing here with my logic. Right now I've got some rules on my edit button that I can either, I'm simply setting a field's value. This is a field in my secondary data source that I'm using for showing and hiding this particular section. And then if a customer's been selected, customer is not blank, then I'm setting the values of these fields in here to the values from my secondary customers data source. So it's this guy right here. So I'm selecting my selected customer based on an XPath filter. So if we take a look here, you can see I'm selecting the company name where the ID matches my selected customer. So I'm filtering my XPath to get back the correct customer. So I'm setting all of these values in my main data source, and the reason I'm setting them in my main data source is because QRules submit to SharePoint List works using main data source fields. We're going to have to create a mapping for both of these sections, the add customer and the add order. We'll be creating two mapping files for those two items. You'll notice I have a field here called SHP ID, and I'm using this field because I want to be able to run updates. I'd like to be able to use my QRules submit to SharePoint list to update items in my list as well as add new items. So we'll talk more about that when we actually put our command together. For now, let's get our mappings created first. So this is a full trust form that comes with QRules. There's installation instructions for this form in your user guide. I think it's at about page 3. It talks about installing these full trust forms. I've already got mine installed, and I'm going to click on Define Mapping. The first thing I need is the XSN, the template file that I'm working with. So I will navigate to that and attach it. And now I need to enter the root to my SharePoint site, and we click the Get SharePoint List button. So I've got my list. The first list I need to map is I need to map my customers list, and I'm going to click the Extract Schemas button. Now, in this instance, I'm not working with repeating data. My data node in my form that I want to be able to submit back to this list is just a single node. My user can add a single customer at a time, or they can update an existing customer, a single customer at a time. That's the structure I've chosen for this form. If my Add Customers node, which you can see in this form, if my Add Customer node was repeating because I was going to allow them to edit or update multiples or add multiples, then my structure would be different here in my mapping, and I would select this checkbox. As it stands, my data is not from a repeating group, so I'm not going to worry about that. So I just need to add my mappings. Now I pointed out that SHP ID field. We don't need to map that because QRules takes care of that. QRules will watch for it. We will tell QRules in our command which field has the ID, so that doesn't need to be mapped. We need to map a few fields though. We need to map our name, our company ID, which in this list is something like the first 5 or 6 characters of the customer name, and we need to map our contact name. Those are the fields I've decided in my form I'm going to require the user to fill out if they're creating a new customer. So first we select name, and you can see the XPath, the full XPath is added there, and I'll go ahead and I'll select my field that I'm mapping to. We add a mapping, we click the button, we expand the schema, and here's our company ID, and we'll select company ID, which is, I think, from my list, customer ID. As you can see, these things don't have to match. That's why we create a mapping file. And so from here, we go ahead and we select one more, and this one is going to be our contact field, and I'll select contact name. Now we're going to save our QRules mapping, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to name this one customer mapping. There we go. And now I need to create a second mapping for my orders. So what I've done is I went ahead and I just changed the list here in my SharePoint list. I extracted schemas again, and then I mapped all of the fields that are in my Add Order section. I've already saved this as a QRules mapping, and I called it ORD mapping. So I've got the 2 mapping files that I need for my next task, and I can go ahead and close this form. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my mapping files as resource files to my form. So that's under the Data tab here. And you can see I've already got this form logic XML, which I'm using for a secondary data source for things I don't want to clutter up my main data source with. And then there's the QRules XML. So I'm going to add my 2 new XML files. And now you can see I've got both of those added here. Next, I need to add data connections to those XML files I just added. To receive data connection, XML document. It's in my resource files. Here's my customer mapping, and I'll just go ahead and say OK there. And I'm going to leave this name, and I'm going to leave this checkbox selected because I want to retrieve data when the form is opened. And now we add one more for our second mapping file. And again, leaving the name as it is and leaving this checkbox selected. We're going to need to add 2 submit data connections. Both of these are going to be the same web service. It's just when we set up our submit data connection, we specify where the submit data connection will find the values it needs for its parameters. And since we're submitting to two different lists, we have to have two submit connections set up, one for each of our mapping files. So we'll do that next. I'm going to just add a data connection. It's going to submit data. And this is to a web service. Now this is going to be the update list items method of the lists web service. So it's basically your SharePoint server followed by _VTI_bin/list.asmx. And then we just have to search through here and we find update list items. There's the one we want. We click next. Now here's where we're going to decide which mapping file we want to use. I'm going to use my customer mapping first. So to get my list name, I need to navigate to that data source, and the list name is right here in the list collection node. And I'll say OK. I leave the rest of this as is. And now for updates, I select the batch node, also in the cust mapping here, and I say OK. This time I'm going to change that to XML subtree, and I'll select next. And now I'm going to name this one cust submit so I can keep these sorted in my head. I'm going to deselect that because I'm not concerned about a default submit connection right now, and I'll say finish. Now I'm going to do the same thing again for my order mapping. So we add again, and it's submit data web service. I save that URL on my clipboard. We click next. Again, it's update list items method. We click next. Now this time I'm going to select values from my order mapping, and it's list collection for the first item. The second parameter is going to take the batch node, also from my order mapping. In this instance, I will change this to XML subtree. Okay? And again, I'm going to deselect this just because I'm not concerned about that right now. And I'm going to call this order submit. So now I have two mappings. I've got cust mapping and order mapping. I've got cust submit and order submit. And I'll want to keep track of these names. I'm going to need these for my QRules command. I tend to generally take a quick screenshot and then use that to help me keep track of things. Next, we need to take care of setting up our QRules command for submitting to our SharePoint list. Let's take a look at the syntax for that command in our user guide. So here's some examples of the syntax. And the syntax we're going to be using today is this one. We're going to include the command, of course, which is submit to SharePoint list, the submit parameter, the mapping parameter, and we are going to include the ID parameter in this instance because we want to be able to update items that are existing. What I've done is I copied in the sample command syntax that I'm interested in, as well as the XPaths I need for my two different ID fields, so that I can create my command here in Notepad. It's just a little easier for me to do my editing here. Sometimes the InfoPath formula windows don't give you very much room to type in a value. So for our command, I'm going to be using submit to SharePoint list. My first one is to submit my customers, so it'll be submit equals, and I named that CUST, submit. Case matters, it is case sensitive, so I used caps on both cust and submit in the submit connection. My mapping file is cust mapping. Again, case is important. It was a lowercase c and a capital M for that. And then I need my ID field. Now, I didn't map repeating data, so I don't use a relative path to my ID field. In fact, I use the full path to my ID field. So here is my first command for submitting my customer data. Submitting my order data, the command is going to be very similar. What's going to change is this is going to be order submit. This is going to be order mapping, ORD mapping, and this, instead of add customer, is going to be add order. Okay, so that all looks good. Now I've got my commands ready to go, so I'm going to put them in my form so we can try them out. I'll do the customer command first. Now generally when I'm working with QRules, I do a little at a time. So I try one command first and then I add my next one. So we'll take that approach here as well. So where my logic should go here is on my save button. And I've already got some logic here to hide my section when I save and to clear my fields when I save. So I'm going to go ahead and just add a new rule. I want to move that up because I'd like it at the top. And I'm going to call this Submit to SharePoint. Okay, and we'll go ahead and add our command. Whoops, wrong item. Change that. I'm going to set a field's value. Now, the command actually takes care of the submitting, so all you have to do is set the command, and the command is going to do everything else. It's going to execute that submit connection so you don't have to worry about it, and it's going to populate your list with the item you've just submitted. If you have an ID in this ID field that you've specified, it will update the existing item. So we're either going to create a new item or we're going to update an existing item. Say OK, and let's give this a try. We're going to try both methods. We're going to update and we're going to create a new. So we'll preview this form. We'll select a customer. I'm going to select the customer at the top of the list just because it'll make it easier for us to find in our customer list on SharePoint. And I'm going to click Edit. Now I added a little logic here that if the customer was already existing, that we couldn't change the company ID because it struck me that that was something we probably shouldn't be able to change. But let's say that our company contact here has changed and Maria Anders got married. Her new name is Maria Anderson, and these folks have added an LLC to the end of their name. We'll click our Save button. Now, one thing to be aware of is we are using a submit data connection here. Since we're using a submit data connection, we have to make sure our form's in a valid state. So if you have fields that cannot be blank or things of that nature, you're going to need to think that through when you set your form up if you want to do things like submit to a SharePoint list partway through the process. QRules does have a clear errors command that you can use that can help you with that, but it's just something to keep in mind. Now, there's a couple things I didn't do here that I should have. One is I should have put the QRules error node onto the form so I could see whether or not there was an error. Instead, we're going to do this the trial and error way, and we're just going to go check our list and see what happened. And so here we are, we're at our customers list, and as you can see, the company name has changed. We've now got an LLC at the end of it, and our contact name is now Maria Anderson. I'm going to change our form now and we're going to add a new customer. So we'll just set this back to blank, and now we'll click our button for editing or adding new. So I'm going to make this customer and company start with an A too, so it's easier for us to find in our list. So this company is going to be Aardvark Importers. This is our new company. And our company contact is going to be Albert. And our company ID is going to be AARD. And I'm going to click Save. And let's go look at our list here. We're going to need to refresh. And after resorting, so that we've got our A's on top, you can see I had been sorted by ID. Here's our new customer of Aardvark Importers. So the next thing I want to do in my form is I want to add to these rules so that I'm also re-querying that customer's data source so that my new entry shows up in my dropdown after I add him. We'll add that here to our Save button. After our Submit to SharePoint command, we'll just add a new action. And it'll be query for customers. And we'll go ahead and we'll query for data. And we're going to use customers for our data source. And we'll say OK. Now, you can add some conditions here. We could check the QRules error node, make sure our data had submitted successfully. This would be a great place to add some error handling. We could check the QRules success node, make sure it was true. Either one of those would be great. You may not want to requery for customers if there was a failure with your SharePoint submit for some reason. As I mentioned earlier, I should have, before we started previewing, put the error node on my form so we could have seen if there were any errors, but fortunately there haven't been. Just a false alarm because I had things sorted by ID. So let's go ahead and preview again, and we'll try our logic once more. So we can see now when we click our drop down that Aardvark importers is listed here. Our list is sorted by ID right now. We could change that in InfoPath when we walk through the data connection and sort by name instead. Right now we're sorted by ID, so anybody new we add is going to be at the bottom. And we can see that our first entry here has an LLC again. And so we'll go ahead and we'll edit him again since he's easy to find. And we're going to get rid of Maria altogether and have Wes come to work there instead. I'll click Save. Now what's fun here is because our customer dropdown is using the ID for the value, you can see our refreshed value is already showing there. So I've previewed my form again. This time I've gone ahead and I've gotten that data source sorted so that it's coming back in alphabetical order. It'll make it easier for us to find our new item. And this time I'm just going to add a new customer directly. I'm going to say, well, there's nothing here that is my particular company. And so this is going to be AAA Auto Supply. And we'll call it AAAA for our company ID, and our company contact is going to be Alfred. And we save. Now another option we could have is on save we could automatically set our customer field to the new ID for the customer we just created. So that's an additional piece of logic that could easily be added. Why don't we do that real quick? If you look at the rules I've got on my Save button, I'm not clearing the fields in that section until very last. So the SPID field should be set with the value of my new customer from QRules. QRules will return that when I create a new customer. So we'll go ahead and we'll just add another rule here, new action, and we'll call it Set Customer, and we're only going to run this if the customer field is blank, so if the user hasn't already selected a customer from the drop-down. Otherwise we'll just leave that customer alone. So if customer is blank, we'll say OK, and we'll add, and we'll just set a field's value. After this we'll do the orders. I just wanted to kind of walk through some of the fun things you can do here since we've got this QRules logic in place for the customer. And the field or group we're going to add is this. We'll just say OK, 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 and we're going to preview once more. We'll add a new customer, and this time what's going to happen is our customer dropdown will automatically get set to our new customer for us. This time I'm not concerned about starting things with A because it's going to be pretty easy to find, and we're going to make our new company InfoPath Detailing Incorporated, and we'll give it an ID of INDE. And I'll go ahead and be the company contact this time. I'll spell my last name right and everything. Maybe. There, I got it spelled right. Okay, so now this time when I click Save, what's going to happen is we're going to submit to the SharePoint list. Our new item is going to get added to the SharePoint list, and our customer up there is going to get set to this new item. So we click Save. And you can see that our customer is now set to InfoPath Detailing, and in fact that will be in our list if we go check our list along with all of the other items we've added or edited. So at this point we know how to add a new customer, we can edit an existing customer, so let's add some functionality for orders. We've already got our QRules command written up here. We wrote them both up at the same time, so let's copy that and we'll add a new rule. And we'll just go ahead and set a field's value here. And we've got the value on the clipboard. And say OK. And I'm going to go ahead and move that up. So here's our rule that's going to submit to our SharePoint list. And since we already know what we need to do rule-wise, let's add another rule to query for orders and a third rule that will set that order field if it's blank. We kind of worked out our logic on our customers section. So we sort of know what we're doing now. So let's add a new action, and this will be query for orders. And we'll just add a query for data. We're going to query using the orders. We'll say OK. Now in the orders data source, when we change customers, this query field for customers already getting set. So it is only returning things that are from that particular customer as far as orders go. And we'll just add one more action, and we'll call that set order. And we'll only do this if the order field is blank. So if we'll set a field's value. And the value is going to be this SharePoint ID, where we will have our new SharePoint ID for our new item after our QRules submit has finished. We'll say OK. We'll say OK. So now our form should be pretty much fully functional as long as we don't have any issues or errors with our new command. So we'll preview it and take a look. In this instance, I don't want to select any of my new customers right yet. We'll select somebody that we know has orders already. So we've selected a customer who has some orders. Now in this case I'm using the order number, which probably doesn't have a lot of meaning, but I didn't have another field that was easy to pick from, so I just used the SharePoint ID. You can see we've copied in some information from our order, and if we want to check our SharePoint list and verify that this is the correct order, we can. So here's my orders list. I've sorted it to just show this customer, and we can see that order ID 352 does correlate with order number 10599. So let's go ahead and update it. Let's change the employee who took the order. Let's say that we want Nancy to have taken that order instead of Michael. And we're going to change the shipping. It's going to go via Speedy Express instead of Federal. We'll save our changes, and then we'll return here to our list, which will refresh. And as you can see, our order's been changed, and now Nancy is the employee for the order, and Speedy Express is who we're shipping via instead of Federal Shipping. Back in our form, if we click our Edit button again, we'll see that the refreshed data has been returned to our main data source section where we're storing our values when we edit them. Let's go ahead and create a new order for one of our new customers who doesn't already have any orders. So we'll use our AAA auto supply, and you can see I've got a rule on the customer field when it changes to clear the order field. And so from here you can see we don't have any orders available for AAA auto supply, so let's create one. We'll need to give it an order number. Now in a real world scenario you'd probably need some kind of logic to make sure you weren't duplicating an existing order number. In this case I'm just going to use 5 nines. I feel pretty confident there's nothing that high. The customer is going to be AAA Auto Supply. We can add some logic there so that that's automatically selected. We'll do that after we fill out this first order. It's going to be Janet, and we'll just go ahead and say we've got some order dates and required dates. We're shipping via United Package, and we could add some information here so that when we selected the customer we filled this in from our customers list as well, which would make great sense. So we might do that as well. We'll go ahead and just leave those things blank for now and click Save. And as you can see, we now have an order number, which indicates success for us, but let's go double check. And here's our new order for our customer that we created earlier via the form. There's some things that could be done here to optimize logic. For example, instead of having just a save button, you might want a save and a cancel button so it's easier for the user to cancel out. Perhaps this order number shouldn't be something the user has to fill in. Perhaps it's something the form logic takes care of for the user. But the one thing that I did think we should probably take care of is when we're creating a new order, as long as a customer is selected, this customer is already populated. So I think what would make the most sense in that case is to set this field of customer when this customer field changes, because after all, every time we change orders here, if there is an existing order, it'll get populated from this data source, so we don't have to worry about having an incorrect customer listed at any point in time. So we'll just go ahead and add an additional rule that sets the customer field in our add order section to the customer in our main data source, and we'll say OK. And I think that completes most of our form logic. Obviously there's plenty of room for refinements. There's additional things that could be done. We could get all of our customer information for our ship fields when the customer is selected here. We could add another data connection to the customers list and use our new SharePoint query fields with SharePoint 2010 and InfoPath 2010 to pull back just the customer data we need. So there's room for enhancements. But as far as the basic functionality goes, this is how you can use QRules and InfoPath to submit data to multiple lists, and this also allows you to update or add new items from InfoPath to your SharePoint list. I hope this has given you some ideas for using QRules in your own form, especially when working with SharePoint. There's some resources in the links at the bottom of this slide. I hope you have time to check them out, and be sure to post in our forum if you have any issues or questions about using QRules. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.